up correctly. And it has, so I'm going full screen. And this full screen shows where we left off. We were showing how we take this irregular bone, the vertebra, and how we stack it. Now, it looks very irregular when you look at one vertebra. However, when you fit them together into a column, the vertebral column, you can see the reason for every ridge, every opening, and every bump. This is the posterior view. You can see on the other side, the anterior side, this round cylinder, where you can only see the edges, is stacked directly on top of the cylinder below it, and consequently provides the platform for the cylinder above it. So there's this stack of vertebral bodies in the front, joined by intervertebral discs. Now those discs allow for tight connection, but also flexibility. If I bend my body to the left, there's a tilt in this vertebra, and this vertebra changes from a coin shape with flat edges to a wedge, in order to provide that flexibility. Now the movement between two vertebrae is relatively limited. However, when you add up all the junctions between the vertebra, that allows for a lot of flexibility and in every direction, because it's a round cylinder. The vertebra can tilt forward, laterally on either side, or backward in bending the spine. Each vertebra has 4 posterior connections shown here as wedges above and below the vertebra itself. So these bumps are called processes. And so what's shown up here with the above the overhead vertebra removed is what's called the superior articulating process. You see how it presents that cartilage pad ready for joining? You see that right here, with the inferior articular facet joined to it. So it kind of forms a 3-point stance, the body on body, and then these 2 joints below, providing a stable mount on the vertebra that's below it. Now this continues up and down the spine. You see a reduction of the size of the vertebra as you go from top to bottom. The cervical vertebra form the neck, and they are numbered from 1 to 7. The cervical vertebra are distinguished by one anatomical feature. Here on the lateral side, you can't see it in this figure. There is a circle of bone on the left and right side called the transverse foramen. It's a hole rather than a post. And that transverse foramen is only found in cervical vertebra. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Up here in C1, we have C1 and C2, very, very special vertebra, because this is the mounting for the skull, and the joint between C1 and the occipital lobe, and the joint between C2 and C1 are what define our head movements. I'll show you that in a moment. 1 through 7 are the cervical vertebra, by far the smallest in the column. Now I mentioned C1 and C2. This is the C1. We are looking here at the C1 vertebra as it sits on top of the C2. See how light it is? Here are the facets that will fit into the occipital condyles on either side of the foramen magnum. It also has this loop of bone and a transverse ligament that forms a enclosed loop around this post called the dens that is on the axis. The atlas is C1, joining the skull above to these facets, and the axis is C2. Now, you can see the kind of rocking chair appearance of this, and if you look at the condyle on the occipital lobe, you'll see it fits in sort of like the rail of a rocking chair. So when we contract the correct muscles, the movement between C1 and the occipital lobe allows for up and down movement of the head, nodding the head. If we want to look up or down, it's this joint right here that is providing that movement. Now, if we want to look side to side, concealed in this joining right here are two flat planar surfaces that allow the C1 to turn, rotating left or right on the C1 on the C2 below it. So it is the joints between C1 and C2 that allow for this movement, left and right, or shaking of the head. Now, when you combine the mobility of those two joints, it allows us to then direct our head in any direction that we wish by combining the rotation of those joints. Another thing worth pointing out with these unusual vertebrae is the presence of these holes. This is the left transverse foramen, that hole I spoke of. Here is of the C1, here's the one for C2. Now, actually, blood vessels and nerves grow up and are held close to the side of the neck, all through the cervical vertebra. So they would run up, the vertebral artery, for example, runs right up through these holes. And it gets up here, it ducks into the back of the skull in providing blood flow to the head. So that's the story of C1 and C2. The others are simply numbered and take up a more repeating form. Below the C7 shown here, it's unlabeled, we have 12 thoracic vertebra. The thoracic vertebra, as you might imagine, define the connection of the thoracic cage. They are numbered T1 through T12. And here we have a one-to-one relationship between vertebra and ribs. If it's a thoracic vertebra, it's going to attach a pair of ribs on the right side, which we can see here, and on the left side, which is concealed. So 2 to 24 are attached. Likewise, if it has a rib, it's a thoracic vertebra. If it's a thoracic vertebra, it has a rib. There are vertebral connections that occur at these junctions between the vertebra, and the transverse process, I'm on the end of a transverse process here and here and here. It's sticking out of the screen straight towards you, so you can't see very much, but you can see a kind of a flattened spot just to the left of the pointer now. There it is on the vertebra above. And that facet, combined with this facet right here at the joining of the bodies, is where the ribs attach. So you can kind of see a rib is going to curve in. And right around, there's a bump a little ways from the end. It's going to form a joint with this facet. And then the head of the rib is going to attach here. That allows for a rib cage where the ribs actually sit down at an angle like this. When we take a deep breath, when we pull our rib cage up, it rotates up and out. So we're going to basically be rotating on this end, the vertebral end of the rib attachment. We'll look at that more in just a moment. The lumbar vertebra are getting larger and larger. I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. As we go down, notice how the thoracics increase in size. And whereas if I gave you a T12 and a T1 and told you that there are two thoracic vertebrae, one's the 1 and one's the 12, you would have no problem telling them apart. But if you're actually comparing like the T6 and T7 or T7 and T8, the difference in size will not be a defining clue. The defining clue for the thoracic vertebra will be the presence of these costal facets, which you can clearly see on the transverse process and on the edge of the body, very, very close to the joining point. So what did we say so far? If I give you an individual vertebra and it has a transverse foramen, it's a cervical vertebra. If I give you a vertebra and you can see costal facets where ribs join, it's a thoracic. So those two features should be used rather than the size of the vertebra to really define the rib or the vertebra. Now, I will tell you that if I give you something in an assembly, like if I show you a picture here and show you with the rib attached, and I ask you to identify this without the labels, you would be able to count that. The same thing would be true of a figure or a model that we might examine in lab. So let's jump back to those lumbars. The lumbars are the largest and blockiest, but once again, the difference between L1 and T12 is not enough to be really diagnostic. But this number 12 rib, a floating rib that you see, hanging out because it doesn't provide any connection around to the front. This number 12 rib attaches to the number 12 vertebra and leaves a facet behind. It's behind this 11 rib that you see in the figure. But the L1 has no rib connection, so there are no facets on its transverse process, no facets here on the body, and as a result, very clearly our lumbar vertebra. Down below, we have this large fused bone. At one time, this sacrum was 5 independent vertebrae, and when we look at it, you'll notice 4 sets of holes running down the posterior surface, defining the 5 sections. Now, it was necessary to fuse those vertebrae when we raised up on our back legs full time. When you're a quadruped, this back hip girdle is supporting the weight of the back part of the trunk, maybe the abdomen, and the back legs and hips. But when you raise up on your back 2 legs, the front part of the body is no longer supported by those front legs. All the weight comes down here. So these vertebrae fused into a single solid bone that provides not only a good base for the spine, but also provides a very solid connection for the pelvic girdle, the coxal bones that we'll mention in a moment. Below the sacrum, we'll see a few segments that we call the coccyx. This is our remnant of the tail that we had that our primate ancestors had, and in normal development, it is suppressed in its development, and we have no tail normally in maturity. Now, the way this happens, there's no real way to go into a nucleus and just clean out genes you're through with. It's clear the early primates and many primates today have tails. It's a part of their brachiating, their living in trees. In fact, some of the more arboreal of the monkeys have not only prehensile hands for gripping, but prehensile feet and a prehensile tail. So they have 5 different ends that they can use to hang on to a branch. We've come down from the trees. We're full-time on the ground. Our feet are walking feet. They're no longer grabbing feet. And we no longer have a tail, along with the other apes. What happened is that a regulatory gene didn't clean out the genes for making a tail. It just shut them off. So that gene package was deregulated, and we normally develop without tails. It is, however, a gene, so it's subject to mutation. If you mutate the deregulating gene so that it no longer shuts off tail development, then a more extensive tail is expressed in humans. And it's a very rare, but not that uncommon mutation. So that leaves us with a third part. We said the skull, the vertebral column, and the thoracic cage form this axial skeleton. And here's the axial, the thoracic cage, perfectly named, because the arching ribs that begin in the back, you can just barely right here see the vertebral connection of this rib. Which one is that? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Rib number 5. This is where the vertebral connection, you're looking through the thoracic cage back to the vertebral column. Here is the connection for rib 11 on the right side and left side, and of rib 12, right side and left side. So they arch around. So if I want to look at the connection for this rib number 3, I'm looking at a vertebral connection that's hidden. Notice how it curves around and drops. So it is tilted downward as we move in the anterior direction. We also see at this anterior side, the rib stops in a very flattened, very blunt end and is attached to a strap of cartilage. These are called the costal cartilages, and the costal cartilages provide the connection between the end of the rib and the sternum. The sternum has several sections we'll talk about in just a moment. But I first want to finish my description of these costal cartilages. These are very much like very heavy leather straps. You know, a belt is very flexible in one direction and can flex a little in the other direction, but when you pull on it, it's very strong. So it provides the ability for us to use our intercostal muscles to raise the rib cage, so the end here of the number 4 vertebra would raise up to this position. And in doing that, would basically, like the bail of a bucket, move away from the vertebral column. That expands the volume of the lungs and allows us to take a much, much large breath of air. The cartilage and their connections divide the ribs into 2 groups. 1 through 7, you'll notice, have direct connection to the sternum. They are called true ribs, and there are 14 of them. 8 through 12 are all called false ribs. With 8 and 9, you'll notice, do have cartilage that attaches here to the downside end of the 7 costal cartilage. So these are called false ribs. But the 11 and 12 have no such connection. The end of the 11 is about in this position on the left and about this position on the right. You can see the 12 arches down, providing some structure in the back, but not really reaching the side of your body. It provides basically only back support. So the point of these 2, 11 and 12, are false ribs, but because there is no cartilage on their end at all, they're rounded. You can often recognize them from their reduced size and the fact that they're rounded at the end instead of very blunt. And these are called floating ribs, 11 and 12. They are also false ribs. So these ribs all arch forward, and 10 pairs attach to this central anterior bone, the sternum. The sternum consists of 3 elements. The upper manubrium, and what a busy bone it is. We're going to find out that the number 1 rib circle is a very important rib. It forms an immovable joint which never flexes. And in addition to that connection, which establishes our ability to breathe deeply, we have a connection up at this side with the clavicle, stabilizing the upper part of the shoulder girdle and the pectoral girdle's attachment to this axial skeleton. So the thoracic cage shown here on the left in orange is part of the axial skeleton, but look how far the clavicle reaches in right here to attach to the manubrium. By the way, that attachment is the only bone-on-bone joint for the connection of our entire shoulder and arm. Joints are much stronger connections than muscle. And So that is an essential joint right there. And the manubrium at the top of the sternum provides it. Moving down, we have the longer body, a bony plate that basically provides connections for ribs 2 through 6 directly. And then below, there's a bony element in this cartilage called the xiphoid process. And this is where rib 7 and all of the associated cartilages through rib 10 are attached. Again, if I ask you how many arms you have, you know it's 2. But if I ask you how many ribs you have, you got to say 24. If I ask you to identify this bone from this figure where the pointer is, you would say that's the number 3 left rib. Another common mistake is people look at it and they say, well, it's on my right side. They call it the right rib. They don't look at the body. I want you to look at the body. So what we see here as we finish up the thoracic cage, there's a real repetition, isn't there? You basically say rib 24 times and add sternum, and you have the whole thoracic cage. For the vertebral column, you say vertebra. How many times is it? 26, 27? And you're done. The real challenge for the axial skeleton is identifying the bones of the skull. And we'll review that, and I'll show you some techniques I use to remember it even today. So what I'm going to do right now is end the show. This will be the second axial skeleton recording.